In the lush outskirts of Maple Hill, Kansas, where the prairie stretches to the horizon and the scent of dark soil rides the breeze, stood a small farm with a rusty tin roof and a weathered oak barn. It was home to the Sullivan family, Hank and Laura, humble farmers whose lives revolved around crops, tractors, and simple dinners under the glow of an oil lamp. They had a single son named Caleb, the one and only light in their hard-working lives. Caleb had never been like the other children. While others played with toy guns or ran after dogs, he was fascinated by screws, gears, and the clinking sounds of wrenches hitting metal frames. Every afternoon after school, he'd dash across the fields to the barn, where his father hunched over a broken harvester. Caleb never asked questions. He simply watched, eyes glowing with admiration, as his father identified the issue and brought the machine back to life. His father, Hank, was a quiet man, patient and reserved. He didn't just teach Caleb how to hold a screwdriver, he taught him a greater lesson. You fix a machine like you fix a broken heart. Start with understanding and respect. Laura, Caleb's mother, was gentle and kind. Her hands were always covered in soil, her blouse sun-faded and threadbare. Whenever she found Caleb tangled in bolts and tools, she would bring him a cool glass of lemonade and softly pat his head with a smile. Life was hard, but it was peaceful. Until one night. It was a May evening and the skies were changing. Dark clouds swept in from the west and strong winds howled through the cracks in their home. Hank was securing the barn roof while Caleb held the ladder steady. Inside, Laura lit the fire for dinner. Then came a deafening crack that split the sky. A bolt of lightning struck the edge of the property. The barn erupted into flames and the tin roof was torn off in a flash. Amidst the chaos, rain, wind, fire, and thunder, Caleb was thrown against a wall and blacked out in the mud. When he awoke in the hospital, he was the only survivor. Everything, his parents, the barn, the life they built, was gone in a single night. The funeral for Hank and Laura Sullivan was small and quiet. A few neighbors came to pay respects. There was no music, no flowers, just 2 wooden grave markers driven into the waterlogged earth behind the house beside the old oak tree. Caleb wore one of his father's old shirts, too large, sleeves folded, and clutched his hat in silence the entire ceremony. He had already cried through the night before. After the funeral, a representative from the county court came to speak with him. Since Caleb wasn't of legal age to inherit property, the house and land would be placed under court supervision. A few weeks later, bank officials came to assess and list the farm for sale. Needed to pay off a small loan his parents had taken to buy an old planting machine. Caleb was left with almost nothing. A cloth bag, a few worn-out shirts, his father's old pocket watch, and a letter his mother had once written but never mailed. He left Maple Hill on a quiet morning in early June. With no family and nowhere to go, Caleb hitchhiked to Wichita, the largest city in the state. He queued at employment centers waiting hours for interviews, only to be repeatedly turned away. No diploma, no experience, too young. Cold responses over and over until rejection became a dull, familiar ache. He found a dishwashing job at a small restaurant, barely enough to buy instant noodles and cover rent, in a rundown room in the city's poorest district. He worked during the day, studied at night. Despite the weight of grief and struggle, Caleb never once considered giving up. Inside him still burned something, maybe the image of his father bent under the hood of a machine, or the thin, warm hand of his mother on his shoulder while he studied. One rainy afternoon on his way home, Caleb saw a luxury sedan pulled over by the roadside, hood up, steam rising. A tall, middle-aged man stood helplessly under the drizzle, clearly distressed. Inside the car, a pale woman clutched a small child, perhaps 6 years old, both visibly weak. Caleb approached. "Need help, sir?" The man eyed him, soaked from the rain, but calm. Without hesitation, Caleb opened the hood. Drawing from what he learned in the barn, he checked the ignition, wires, and oil levels. 20 minutes later, the engine came to life. The man reached into his wallet, pulling out a thick wad of cash. "Thank you, son. Please take this. You may have just saved my family." Caleb shook his head. "No need. Just helping out." The man looked at him for a long moment, then smiled and nodded. He got back into the car, but before leaving, turned to take one last look at Caleb, memorizing his face. Caleb walked away. He didn't know what kind of opportunity he'd just turned down. All he knew was that his heart felt lighter, like he'd honored a promise to his parents. 2 weeks after that rainy night, Caleb spotted a small poster taped to a bus stop. "Enrollment open, basic technical training program, Wichita Technical College, tuition support available." His heart pounded. He had nothing left, but one dream still burned: to work with machines, to fix, to touch the world his father once lived in. He gathered all his savings, applied for the entrance exam, and went to the test center with trembling hands. No one believed a boy with no family documents, living in shelters and scraping by, could pass. But Caleb did. He was accepted into the mechanical engineering program, a class filled with sons of garage owners, factory directors, boys who arrived in chauffeured cars and believed the world revolved around them. On the very first day, Caleb entered the classroom wearing an old jacket and a frayed backpack. No one asked his name. There were only sideways glances, smirks, and cruel whispers when he took a seat at the back. "Look, the bus kid thinks he's here to learn how to fix Ferraris. Maybe he's a demo unit so we can practice fixing the poor. You think he came here for the free lunch?" Caleb heard it all, but he didn't react. He remembered his father's words. "Machines don't lie, only people do with their words and looks." The first months were brutal. Caleb studied by day and washed cars on weekends. At night, he waited tables at a diner. He barely slept more than 3 hours a night. Sometimes he nodded off at his desk. Occasionally, teachers scolded him for being late, but Mr. Jenkins, an older instructor with a gruff voice and sharp eyes, watched Caleb silently, differently. One day, during a practical exam on assembling an engine system, the class was divided into groups. No one wanted to work with Caleb. He had to complete the task alone. While other teams struggled with misconnected wires and missing parts, Caleb finished his model on time, perfectly functional. He stood silently, not gloating. Mr. Jenkins approached, examined the setup, and nodded quietly, a small but powerful gesture. Mr. Jenkins' silent respect was the only acknowledgement Caleb received. The rest of the time he remained isolated, but he held on. To Caleb, any day spent with machines was a day worth living. That winter, Caleb received his first semester results. Top of the class. Jack Damon, son of the production director at Monroe Auto, walked over, smirking. "Don't think being number one means anything, busboy. In this world, people like us can buy a position. You'll always be the oil change guy." Caleb said nothing, but inside him a quiet flame had begun to rise. One early spring afternoon, as the first golden rays of March sun dried the muddy patches around the schoolyard, Caleb received a notice from the academic office. "You have been nominated as Student of the Year. Please attend the school's award ceremony this Saturday afternoon." He thought it must be a mistake, but soon the news spread across campus, stirring whispers, stares, and not much joy. How could a nobody, a penniless loner, stand on the stage that so many princelings had dreamed of? Jack Damon, son of the Monroe Auto production director, was the first to sneer, "Hey, how about we all give Caleb a round of applause, a little warm welcome for the hero of the hour?" Laughter erupted from his group. Caleb said nothing. His silence was his armor, stronger than any retort. On the day of the ceremony, Caleb wore a neatly ironed white shirt and a pair of clean but old trousers. He stepped onto the stage under a wave of awkward, scattered applause. Below him were long tables draped in white, lined with professors, donors, and special guests. As he looked out into the crowd, his eyes locked with a familiar gaze, deep, calm, with a voice he still remembered from a rainy night. It was him. Same gray suit. But this time he wasn't a stranded driver on a dark road. He was Chairman Richard Monroe, the school's top benefactor and founder of the largest automotive engineering firm in the region. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Monroe gave a slight smile, said nothing, just nodded once, as if to say, "I remember you." After the ceremony, as Caleb was about to leave, someone called to him in the hallway. "Caleb Sullivan, Mr. Monroe would like to invite you to lunch with the school's advisory board." He was stunned. The luncheon took place in a private VIP room on the top floor of the school building. It was the fanciest meal Caleb had ever seen. Silver cutlery, white tablecloths, waiters in black suits. Seated near Mr. Monroe were the dean, the principal, and a few company representatives. Caleb sat at the humblest corner of the table, but Mr. Monroe occasionally leaned over to ask him quiet questions. "You chose this field out of passion, didn't you? Your father was Hank, right? I heard his name once, down in southern Kansas." Caleb was taken aback. No one knew who he really was. No one except him. The lunch ended with no big words, no promises. But a few days later, the school announced that Caleb had been awarded a full scholarship through to graduation, along with a modest monthly living stipend, funded by an anonymous foundation. Caleb didn't need to guess. He was grateful, but he never asked, because true kindness does not demand recognition, and those who receive it only need to live well, so as not to betray that trust. Caleb graduated at the top of his class with an unblemished academic record. His honors diploma in applied mechanical engineering opened doors at several reputable technical firms, but he submitted only one application. Monroe Auto, renowned for its cutting-edge engineering environment and where Chairman Richard Monroe held an honorary role. The interview took place on a Monday morning in a glass conference room overlooking the most advanced assembly line in the state. 4 men sat across from Caleb, 3 HR managers, and one tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and an icy expression, Philip Damon, production director and father of Jack Damon. Caleb answered every question calmly and with precision, demonstrating clear technical knowledge and practical insights. But each time he spoke, Mr. Damon folded his arms, looked away, and occasionally smirked as if he were watching a performance he didn't care for. At the end of the interview, Philip Damon asked, "You were in school with Jack, right?" Caleb nodded. "My son doesn't speak highly of you." Caleb stayed silent. Damon scoffed. "Let's hope your skills outshine your reputation." A week later, Caleb received the offer, hired as a quality control engineer in the assembly workshop. It was hands-on, practical work, but offered little room for advancement. Still, Caleb didn't complain. He worked tirelessly, volunteered for extra shifts, and took on the jobs no one else wanted, tight, greasy, thankless tasks in corners of the factory few visited. The line workers respected him. He didn't brag, didn't blame, and never claimed credit. But Jack Damon, now the team leader in the design department, wasn't done with him. Jack sabotaged Caleb whenever he could. He had others cause accidents in Caleb's section, submitted altered reports to frame him for mistakes, and even accused Caleb of damaging design drafts and delaying production. One day, Caleb was summoned for a formal inquiry. In the boardroom, Philip Damon sat waiting, his gaze cold as steel, expecting Caleb to accept the blame. But Caleb came prepared. He calmly laid out security footage, internal emails, and even system error logs he had quietly archived. The room fell silent. Philip Damon said nothing, but the fallout came quietly. Caleb was transferred, demoted, to the final inspection unit, a department unofficially known as a dead end for unwanted engineers. Still, Caleb didn't give up. Every morning he arrived early. Every evening he stayed late to study CNC programming and advanced diagnostic tools. And every time he remembered turning down a wad of cash in the rain years ago, he reminded himself that this road, however rough, was his choice. One weekend afternoon, while taking notes alone in the parts warehouse, A janitor leaned over and whispered, "Hey, did you hear? Mr. Monroe is visiting the plant today. People say something's going down." Caleb stood up straight. His heart knew. This might be the first time they would meet again face to face since that rainy night and since the day on the stage. That morning, the Monroe auto plant buzzed with unusual tension. Everyone knew that Richard Monroe, the company's founder, had long retired and left operations to the executive board. But sometimes, without warning, he would show up unannounced without a driver or entourage just to hear the real heartbeat of the company. Caleb was not in the executive lounge where the managers lined up nervously. He was in the final inspection bay, bent over a faulty laser encoder, rewriting code for a malfunctioning print system. It was a job the design team should have handled, but they had delegated it down to him. Then footsteps echoed behind him. "Mr. Sullivan, someone's here to see you," said a supervisor, visibly flustered. Caleb looked up. Standing behind him was Mr. Richard Monroe, silver-haired, composed, his gaze calm yet firm, holding the same quiet warmth Caleb remembered from that rainy roadside encounter. "You still work like your father once did, head down, meticulous and never waiting for applause." Caleb rose, stunned, but before he could speak, Monroe extended a hand. "Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." They entered Conference Room 7, a large space typically reserved for high-level disciplinary hearings. The room was packed. Inside were executives, HR leaders, and seated stiffly at the table, Philip Damon and Jack Damon, both pale and tense. Projected across the screen behind them were emails, screenshots, surveillance clips, and internal data logs. Clear proof that Jack and Philip had repeatedly undermined Caleb, manipulated reports, and even rigged employee evaluations to block not only Caleb, but several other deserving engineers from advancement. Mr. Monroe stood, his voice low and clear, cutting sharper than steel. "I did not build this company so that anyone's son could trample the efforts of another. Sabotage is not a business strategy. It is a cancer." He turned to Caleb. "And you, who once refused my money, who walked instead of bowing, who survived loss without ever once complaining, you are the kind of man this company needs." The decision was swift and public. Jack Damon was suspended indefinitely, pending further investigation for falsifying technical records. Philip Damon was dismissed as production director and ordered to issue a formal apology to the entire engineering division. Caleb was promoted to lead engineer of the company's flagship automation upgrade project, the most important initiative of the coming year. After the meeting, Monroe invited Caleb to his personal office. The room was sunlit, spacious, filled with quiet books and blueprints. There was a knock on the door. A woman entered, long brown hair, poised posture, a gentle yet intelligent gaze that seemed to soften the air around her. "Do you remember Elena?" Caleb froze. The image of a sickly girl curled in her mother's arms during that stormy night returned like a silent wave. Now, Elena Monroe, Richard's daughter, had grown into a brilliant environmental engineer, just returned from a research fellowship in Switzerland. She approached, extending her hand. "Thank you for fixing the car that night. If you hadn't, I might not be standing here today." Caleb shook her hand, but their eyes met and lingered, far longer than any formal greeting. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them, warm, steady, and real, and no one in the room said a word. The following spring, Kansas bloomed in brilliant green and gold. The wind carried the scent of young grass, freshly plowed soil, and memories of a childhood long gone, lingering like a soft echo in the heart of a grown man. Caleb sat behind the wheel of a modest new pickup truck, not luxurious but solid and reliable, as it rolled to a stop in front of an old, weathered wooden gate. Beyond the prairie stretched a familiar path, leading to the remains of what used to be his family's home. Only a cracked stone foundation and a few scattered walls were left standing. He stepped out, quietly approached the oak tree behind the old house, the place where his parents were laid to rest, and softly said, I'm home now, but this time I'm not alone. Behind him, Elena Monroe stepped out of the truck, her white dress flowing gently in the breeze, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hand. They said nothing. Instead, they held hands and walked together to place 2 fresh bouquets beneath the oak, one from a son and one from a daughter-in-law. Their wedding was simple. No flashy cars, no celebrity guests, no lavish displays, just a quiet outdoor ceremony in the heart of the prairie, attended by close friends, a few workers from Monroe Auto, old classmates, and Mr. Jenkins, the instructor who once believed in Caleb when no one else did. Even some of the factory technicians who had worked with Caleb during his hardest days showed up, wiping their hands on their shirts and brushing tears from their eyes. Mr. Richard Monroe sat in the front row, silently dabbing his eyes as he watched his daughter walk down the aisle, toward not a man of wealth or status, but one whose heart had proven itself time and time again, since that fateful rainy night. After the wedding, Caleb and Elena did not move into a city mansion or gated community. Instead, Caleb bought back the very land where he was born, with quiet help from Mr. Monroe, and began rebuilding from the foundation up. He opened a modern repair and engineering workshop dedicated to training underprivileged youth in technical skills, free of charge. Elena established an environmental restoration lab, helping local farmers rehabilitate the overworked soil and adopt sustainable practices. Together, they became symbols of hope in the prairie, not because they were rich, but because they chose to return to the place of their greatest loss and breathe life back into it, with love, knowledge, and unwavering resolve. Years later, a group of students from the city visited the Caleb Sullivan Technical Center. One curious little girl raised her hand and asked, "Sir, are you the best engineer in this whole area?" Caleb chuckled warmly. "I'm not sure if I'm the best, but I'm sure I never gave up." Behind him on the wall hung a black and white photo, an old image of a man hunched over a tractor engine, and beside him, a small boy with bright eyes, watching. Below it, engraved in brass, was a single line: "If you can't fix the whole world, start with one machine, one person, one place that was once broken."